Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. There's a familiar saying, no rest for the weary. It attempts to convey the truism that those who work hard often find themselves never finished with their efforts. Their weariness is, more often than not, met with additional work rather than rest. Their job never seems to be completed. But in the Bible, rest is a common theme. After 6 days of creation, God rested on the seventh day, and He established the seventh day of the week as a Sabbath, a day of rest for His people. God had also promised to bring the people of Israel into their rest by leading them into the land He had promised to give to Abraham. There they would enjoy rest, not a cessation from work or effort, but an end to their years of slavery, wanderings, and nomadic lifestyle. They would come into their own, a land provided to them by God. And in Joshua chapter 18, verses 1 through 10, Joshua encourages the people by setting up the tabernacle of God in a place called Shiloh, which means place of rest. The tabernacle, representing God's abiding presence, was to bring comfort and peace to His people as they continued their work of possessing the land He had given them. Their work was far from done, but they could rest in God's abiding presence and power. After having settled the tribes of Judah, Manasseh, and Ephraim in the southern region of the land of Canaan, Joshua still had the task of apportioning the rest of the land between the 7 remaining tribes. The tribes of Reuben and Gad had already been allotted their portions on the eastern side of the Jordan, as they had requested. But before Joshua proceeds with the final distribution of the land, he calls for an assembly of all the people of Israel at a place called Shiloh, and oversees the erecting of the tabernacle. When God had originally given Moses his instructions regarding the construction of the tabernacle, He had included commands regarding its placement in the land of promise. But when you go over the Jordan and live in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and when He gives you rest from all your enemies around so that you live in safety, then to the place that the Lord your God will choose, to make His name dwell there, there you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the contribution that you present, and all your finest vow offerings that you vow to the Lord. Deuteronomy 12, verses 10 through 11. So Joshua's choice of Shiloh as the resting place for the tabernacle was obviously determined by God. It's interesting to note that the name Shiloh means place of rest. The tabernacle was to be a reminder of God's presence and power, and a representation of God's promise of rest. When God dwells with His people, they enjoy rest. His presence brings peace and an assurance of His care for them. The movement of the tabernacle from Gilgal is significant. It had been Israel's base camp during their days of conquest of the Promised Land. But now that the land lay subdued before them, it was time to relocate the tabernacle to an appropriate place within the land of promise. And God's choice of Shiloh was in keeping with His promise to bring Israel into the Promised Land, a place of rest. When Jacob had pronounced blessings upon his sons, he had said of Judah, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." Genesis 49, verse 10. In the Hebrew, the phrase, "until tribute comes to him," actually reads, "until Shiloh come." In the Jewish Orthodox Bible, verse 10 reads, "The shevet, or scepter, shall not depart from Yehudah, nor a mekokek, lawgiver, from between his raglaim, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall be the obedience of the Amim, or peoples." This passage, containing Jacob's blessing of the tribe of Judah, is a messianic prophecy. It predicts Jesus, Shiloh, as coming from the tribe of Judah. He would one day be the ruler who will hold the scepter, a sign of authority and kingship. He will rule and reign as king, and He will come to offer rest to His people. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Matthew 11, verses 28 through 29. Jesus came that He might offer rest to the weary, and Shiloh, located in the territory allotted to the tribe of Ephraim, was the location of the tabernacle. It was to be a sign of God's presence and should have been a cause for great peace and tranquility. When the people came to offer their sacrifices and worship, they would have found forgiveness for their sins and an acceptance by their God. But years later, the prophet Isaiah would speak words of condemnation against Ephraim. They would prove to be disobedient to God, and rather than find rest, they would discover themselves suffering the wrath of God for failing to enter into his rest and enjoy his blessings. For by people of strange lips and with a foreign tongue the Lord will speak to this people, to whom he has said, "This is rest, give rest to the weary, and this is repose," yet they would not hear. Isaiah 28 verses 11 through 12. In a single verse, the author of the book of Joshua mentions the setting up of the tabernacle in Shiloh. It was to have been a symbolic act, establishing God's abiding presence among his people. He had brought them to the land and provided for them a place of rest, but their enjoyment of that rest would require faithful obedience on their part. And it's significant that the final apportioning of the land did not take place until after the tabernacle was established in Shiloh. Joshua had to read the riot act to the 7 remaining tribes, scolding them for having procrastinated in subduing the remainder of the land. It appears that they had failed to continue their conquest of the inhabitants of the land. Perhaps Joshua's decision to set up the tabernacle was meant to be a form of motivation, letting the remaining tribes know that God was with them. He had set out teams of 3 men from each tribe, having them survey the remaining land, establishing boundaries for the establishment of their potential inheritance. Once this process was complete, Joshua would cast lots, determining which portion of the land was assigned to each of the tribes. God was in their midst. He had chosen to dwell among them, and with the erection of the tabernacle in the city of Shiloh, the place of rest, God was reminding them of their need to do their part, to enjoy the rest he had promised them. Just as Jesus invites all those who are weary and burdened to accept his invitation to find rest in him, the Israelites were going to have to take God at his word and discover that his rest came through obedience to his commands.